Chris, DP, thank you so much for taking the time. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Great to be here.
Thank you. Chris, let me start with you. You're the state. You're running for the State Board of Education, right? Here in Columbus, Ohio, and the election is pretty much coming. How do you feel?
I feel okay. I mean, I've not run for office before, so this is all very new to me. You know, my Facebook had a little bit of activity before, and now it has a lot, and I'm getting used to that. So it's very exciting. Oh yeah. It's been really great. And so a lot of people will just reach out to me on Facebook and say that they found my profile on the League of Women Voters. So a great thing for voters to do is vote 411. If you Google that, vote 411. Pretty much every candidate has filled out these couple different questions, and it's all the same questions. And so you kind of get different people's answers to those. So I filled out those questions. My opponents have filled out those questions, and sometimes people just reach out to me on Facebook and say, "Hey, I voted for you. I saw your responses." So that's really encouraging. That always makes my day.
You and DP were having a good conversation before we just get started, right? So I want to come back on that a little bit. In the education system here in Columbus, Ohio, what do you think that we need to fix that is not currently fixed now? I'm talking about generality, right? I'm not talking about specifics, and actually we'll get into a little bit of specifics. But generally speaking, in education in Ohio, what do you think that we need to fix that we're lacking, we're not doing it right now?
Yeah, the thing that just happens to be on the top of my mind is the buses. So my godchildren, they use the buses like everybody else, and so I've been there on the bus corner waiting there for 45 minutes or an hour and trying to figure out if the thing is going to come or not. And the State Board of Education is not the same thing as the Columbus City School Board. And so we don't have direct power over the busing in Franklin County, but we do, if it's a problem in Franklin County, it's probably a problem across the state. I mean, I think that it's a well-known phenomenon that we just don't have enough bus drivers, and it's part of why there's so many delays. But trying to do something about that and trying to see how we can try to influence the State House to address the lack of bus drivers. And so that we're not all sitting on the corner, it's 20 degrees outside all the time.
It normally takes like that long for the bus to come to you?
I mean, sometimes the buses don't come at all. I mean, within the last year, I mean, there's a lot of drama on the Columbus City School Board, which again is not what I'm running for. Okay. But there's like Metro High School, so there's a lot of Somalis that and African immigrants who go to Metro High School, or their children go to Metro High School. Metro High School, it's not technically part of the public schools, but it's also not really a charter school either. It's technically a STEM school, but from the standpoint of the buses, they're treated like the charter schools are. And so that the Columbus City Schools buses take kids to Metro High School. Last year they told me that they have 12 buses, and this year they have 5. So that's how bad it's become with the buses in Franklin County.
Because is it hard to find drivers?
Yeah, I mean it doesn't pay a ton of money to be a bus driver, and people can probably make more money driving for COTA, I assume. If you drive for COTA, you have to deal with adults, but then you don't have to deal with small children, I guess. I don't know. So that's I'm sure that's affecting everyone with the schools for sure.
I think education is an issue that affects all of us as citizens. So, I hope we get, great leaders like my brother here that cares about education.
I mean, this goes. Go ahead.
So I'll say one more thing, which is that the Columbus City Schools is struggling, right? And other districts in Franklin County are struggling. And part of the reason they're struggling is because a lot of kids are missing a lot of school. And one piece of that puzzle is the buses, for sure. So on the State Board of Education, a maneuver that we could do, I think, in January would be to declare a bus driver staffing crisis, basically. And to have that be the backdrop and have the newspapers write about that going into the spring 2025 budget negotiations in the State House.
That's interesting, because I was going to ask a question about, what are the key issues you think that voters should pay attention to, and I think that might be one of it.
Yeah, if there's another issue for the state board and another thing that we want to do besides the bus driver staffing crisis, I think there's also a teacher staffing crisis, right? Because you can go onto the Ohio Department of Education workforce website and see there's a certain number of teachers that there's a number there for when the teachers are absent from the classroom, because teachers get sick and teachers can't always be there, and where a lot of teachers are just leaving the field because they don't feel respected, they don't feel appreciated, they don't always feel compensated enough, and then while that is happening, and I've worked with teachers who have left the field actually, so we're not far from Reynoldsburg. One of the first teachers that I worked with in 2016, they taught physics at a high school in Reynoldsburg, and they're not there anymore because they found they could make 30 or 40% more money using their technical skills coding for one of the banks in town. And so there are some real pressures for people to leave the classroom, and then unfortunately there's not a steady supply of people from higher education to fill those roles. And I'm a professor at Ohio State University, and the number of people enrolling to become new teachers is on the decline. So even as the teacher openings are up and the vacancies are up, the younger students getting ready to fill those roles aren't there anymore.
So how do we fix that?
Right. Well, declaring a teacher staffing crisis would be the first step, right? I mean, the State Board of Education has lost a lot of power in the last year. So the Republicans didn't think it should have as much power as as it used to.
Yeah.
And but one of the things it can do is pass resolutions, but there's a lot of it's a bipartisan board. So like some of them are elected positions. So I'm running for one of the 11 elected positions, but there's also 8 appointed positions appointed by the governor. So those people are going to be Republicans, and so a thing that I think any Republican should agree with would be that we're in the middle of a teacher staffing crisis and a bus driver staffing crisis.
Interesting. I think we're having issue. I mean, that's a major issue for the education system, right? So kids are missing schools. Part of it is the bus not being on time. Maybe the bus not showing, the shortage of the bus. What can you add to that?
Well, actually, if you don't mind, I wanted to ask him a question. Yeah. So you said that the teachers or the education board has lost a lot of power over the years, mm-hmm. right? And I imagine that a consequence of that is what you just mentioned, the teacher shortage, the bus shortage, the lack of priorities in grassroots education, right? Is that correct or no?
Yeah, so even when the state board had all the power that it had, it did not actually control the budget for the schools. And so part of what I'm saying is that if we pass a resolution, that could put pressure on the people that do have the control of the budget, which is the State House. And so a thing that I could do, I don't have to do this, but once we pass that resolution, then I can go to the State House and I can testify on whatever the big budget bill is, and I can say, you've got to address this. You've got to give the urban and rural schools more money to hire bus drivers, so our kids just aren't left on the curb, literally.
I don't know the way this works, but is there a way to actually give the board actual financial autonomy where you control your own budget or whatever?
I mean, we have a budget that we use to support the staff members who process the teacher licenses. So if you want to teach in Ohio or drive a bus in Ohio, you have to fill out forms on a website, and then those applications go to people that work for the State Board of Education that would say yes or no, mm-hmm. You can do that. So there's money. So there's money that gets spent to keep those things rolling, because there's a lot of teachers that are that need to have these things processed. So there's money there, but that doesn't mean that we have are directly funding the schools.
When you came to the podcast, one of the things you mentioned was that if there's all I do sit on the State Board of Education, just
right.
hand a mic for for those huge organizations that right now don't have the ability to come to the State House and when there's a big, huge decision to be made on education, and they're not there to add on their part on. So now, what can they contribute to that in terms of kind of solving this kind of crisis? Because those are huge organizations, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, so for each teacher organization, and so there's the math teachers, there's the science teachers, the computer science teachers, and the engineering teachers. I mean, each one of those organizations has their own sphere of expertise, and so if we're trying to improve that sphere, we should be talking to them. So, like, for example, the math scores dropped significantly after the pandemic. As far as I can tell, no one in the State House is talking to the Ohio Council for Teachers of Mathematics about what we should do to try to improve it, right? So I presume there's bus driver organizations and bus driver unions, things like that can have ideas on how they can improve these things. What's sad, and the thing that I'm saying is that if you look at what the State House is doing, they're not writing bills that address this. They're not allocating funds to address. They're allocating funds for reading. That's great. You know, we want our kids to learn how to read. Where's the funds to address the drop in the math scores, right? Like almost many of the bills that are discussed in the State House have little to do with academic performance, and this is just one example.
Okay. I want to switch gears on. Can you talk about a little bit about the debate that you guys going to organize on November 1st and November 2nd?
November 1st, Friday, November 1st.
Can you talk about a little bit what inspired to create that, and the logistics side of it, how you're planning on to continue doing that, what do you hope to gain out of it, that type of stuff?
Sure. So what inspired it? For the last 10 years, I have been working as a political consultant in Nigeria, with a focus on integrated content marketing, so helping candidates find their voice and ensuring that their campaign messages between digital media sources or channels to traditional sources like radio is consistent, right? And I've always been fascinated. I went to OSU, got a degree in political science, and I have always been fascinated by Oxford-style debates where you would have, two minds just battle it out, and then it's the audience that, decides who won, as opposed to just people going back and forth and shouting at each other. And I've always been a fan of like the Intelligence Squared, series, the Monk debates and whatnot. And one of the things I realized, especially because I work, on the ground, is that the conversations about us, the Afro-eclectics, the Africans, they don't exist in those platforms. And instead of complaining about it, we have an opportunity to actually, fix it, change it. And that's what the African Debate Series is about. We've partnered with the OSU African and African American Studies and the Ohio African Chamber of Commerce to create an environment where intellectuals, where minds come together and really, really start to debate issues that not only affect us in the diaspora, but our people back home.
That's excellent. That's excellent. And stay tuned. Like you said, I like to look forward to the immigrant community. I mean, this question will both go out to you. The immigrant community that here is in Columbus, Ohio, right? So Columbus is one of the cities in Midwest that is really growing really rapidly, right? And housing might be another issue that the Franklin County or the city is just kind of sort of facing, generally speaking, but that will have a lot of impact on this upcoming elections, right? So both, anybody can just jump in and so how do you see that as an immigrant? I mean, I'm sure you have seen the Ohio States, quite a few students that are immigrants through your department or through in general around the campus. You graduated from the Ohio State with the political science. So how do you see the immigrants that are here in Columbus, Ohio, to impact in the elections that's coming up right now?
Please.
Sure. Yeah, I think that people are really energized with this election. People realize how much is at stake, and I met with Munira last week, and so she's she is going out and canvassing. I mean, part of me running for office, I've got to see what everyone else is doing, and people are going out into communities every day and getting out the vote. And yeah, people's voices matter in this one for sure.
For sure. I think that there are two things going on. I completely agree with my brother that there's a lot of energy. I think that on one hand, there is a party that whose rhetoric makes it easier for the African immigrants to pick a side, if you will, right? No one likes to be, talked down to. No one likes to be, called less than. And I think that within the African community, this election gives them an opportunity to say, I exist. On the other hand, when you listen to especially the African immigrants that have been here for a while, especially the African immigrants that have roots here, that own businesses here, there is a concern that that a political party that that typically they would feel at home with takes them for granted. Right? They only show up during election cycles, and then every 4 years, the African community starts to ask, what have you done for me since 4 years, since you were here, right? During the election season now, you have a lot of,
Specifically, which party you're referring to?
Yeah, I'm just gonna come out and say it. So, especially the Democrats, right? So on one hand, you find that even though a lot of, and I can only speak for, I'm Nigerian, right. So I know more about, the Nigerian community, so on one hand, there's no doubt that, most of the Nigerian or the African community members that I know are voting Democrat, but at the same time, there's real concern that the Democrats take the African community for granted. Do not show up for the African community until during election period when they want votes. And, like I said, clearly the Republican Party, with their rhetoric, particularly about our Haitian, brothers and sisters, is frankly abhorrent. And so, it's an interesting time that we're living in.
No, it's very, you mentioned that because we had a roundtable on last Monday, and one of the things that, I'm not sure who mentioned this, but it was quite interesting that is to your point that one party is taking granted for the African voters, but it's almost like saying that, I have their vote in the bag because the other party is much worse to them. Does that make sense?
That is true. And I think it's not just us Africans. I think even our African American, multi-generational brothers and sisters feel the same, have the same concerns. And you hear it too, especially amongst black men, which is why Obama, had to make that speech that went viral, I think it was last week. There are real conversations going on. And again, the African debate series is an opportunity to confront that head on instead of us speaking within our mouths,
Chris, you've been endorsed by the Democrat Party?
So I've been endorsed by a couple of Democrats. I'm not officially endorsed by the State of Ohio Democratic Party or the Franklin County Democratic Party, but I am endorsed by Sherrod Brown, for example.
Awesome.
Yeah, which I'm grateful for.
Endorsement.
I can. Yeah.
They're endorsements and endorsements.
Yeah. Right. I'm also endorsed by the teachers unions. Thank you. Yeah. I mean, I think in Ohio. I think that I think it's a matter of time before we have someone from African heritage on the Columbus City Council. I think that day is coming. If there's something I can do to help that day to come sooner, with the relationships I've developed with Franklin County Democratic Party, I'd love to help make that happen for the right person.
Yeah, it's an interesting time. So how much we have now between now and the election? Today is the 21st. What day is it today? And the election is upcoming on check on that. Definitely know that. When would you find out you made it?
Probably by election night. I mean, I would imagine.
Okay. And
5.5 counties are in my district. Did you know that?
no, I did not know that.
Yeah.
Yeah, you represent like almost 1 million people, right?
Yeah.
You get
Yeah.
that, right? Because it's the state of Ohio, not in Columbus. That's interesting.
3 times more than the state senator, actually.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So how do you got Brown's endorsement?
There,
Did you met him before, or how did that come about?
yeah, so there's a program called the Canary Candidate Program, and so they had a variety of questions that they filled out. Sherrod Brown is a friend of the unions for sure, and so he has a great relationship with the teachers' unions. He has a great relationship with all the auto workers' unions and all the unions. He pickets with them. There is no better friend to unions than Sherrod Brown. And so I'm supported by the teachers' unions. My grandfather was a union steel worker in Cleveland for most of his life. So I talked a little bit about that in the Canary Candidate endorsement. And I think people appreciated both the expertise that I bring to the role and the way that I'm going to do whatever I can to advance public education.
Excellent. Education in general, right? That piece of paper of diploma, is it worth the debt that a lot of students take home?
So for me, I would say yes, but it's because
Because we're immigrants, and immigrants are expected to be like lawyer, attorney.
Well, actually, no. Initially, I was actually an econ major, and one of the challenges that I had with economics was it wasn't personal. And ever since I was young, I was always fascinated with just world history. I used to go to the library, and back then they had the VHSs, and I'd get like a bunch of just documentaries on, Civil War and, just history stuff. And so I dropped out of OSU for a few years, and when I was ready to go back, the question I kept on asking myself was, what could I study that no matter what, I feel like I'm I'm leveled up, if you will. And political science for me was a gift, And then having the ability just to apply it, right? Because you spend all these years learning about just human interest in an abstract way, but then you see it play out because human beings are always the same. You see it play out in interactions on the field where you're, running for congresses, where you're doing local government stuff. I am grateful that I studied political science at The Ohio State University. It's one of the best decisions I've made. That said, there's still debt, but I don't regret it at all. It was a great thing.
Would you obtain that same knowledge without the Ohio State if you wanted to, without the Ohio State name attached to it? Because that name carries a lot, right?
It's not the name so much. It's just the incredible professors that challenged us to think. Right. You know what I mean? And again, political science is not just theory. There's all kinds of facets to it. There's a lot of math. There's a lot of statistics, and there's a lot of things involved if you're studying political science. And I don't see
Data
that.
scientists.
Exactly. There's
YouTube classes for that as well.
Yeah, but there's no structure. You don't have professors that can kind of guide you. I mean, I learn a lot on YouTube and stuff, but I don't think that we should diminish structured education and the value it brings to shaping minds, right? I think it's extremely valuable. And then if you have the opportunity as well to apply it, whether through internships, but in my case, it was just the School of Hard Knocks. I think it's a gift. I was prepared for the things that I saw because I saw it in some way, shape, or form in my mind, from people behind me. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. Chris, and I mean, with you being a teacher and a professor and living in the classroom, that piece of paper, what do you think in terms of taking the death, and is it really worth it?
think it's about the community of the students that are in the classroom, because you're right, you can learn things on YouTube, but you can't always find a community of people to learn it with you, and having those people alongside you really spurs everyone on, sometimes in a competitive way, but most of the time in a friendly way, like, I figured out how to do this homework problem, did you figure out how to do this one, and can you teach me that? I mean, at the end of the day, that's the experience. So you see schools like MIT putting all their lectures online. Mm-hmm. People still go to MIT, right? So that's what it's about.
Okay. There's so many ways to look at it, specifically in that education, but for me, personally speaking, I don't think it's worth 4 years of debt just to obtain a business administration. If you don't have any plan added on, anything else on top of that.
I think I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I think what you're describing is maybe so you use business administration, and maybe there's so much, out there for you to learn how to do business administration that you don't need a degree in it, right? Uh-huh. But it doesn't, that's a different argument from, is going to college important?
But the people that you meet in the college and in the dorms, you're gonna, by definition, you're meeting people that aren't like you, and that's a big part of the experience.
The networks. That's what he's
exactly.
describing.
The community, yeah.
Well, it's one of those things that I feel like, because there's a number that I came across, and I think 51% or 52% of the number of people that go to college graduate, and the other 48 or 49 end up with a debt. And that's a huge number to look at it.
There's another thing too. I was watching this University of Austin professor talk about the wealthiest time in the world, which was America, I think in the 1950s or something like that, 60s, before we basically shipped manufacturing to Asia, right? And at that same period, I think he said, was when we started creating this, what we call financial assistance, which was basically from his lecture, a way of making students less prone to, spending their free times protesting and asking questions of the government. My point is, it's not, I do not believe that it's an inevitability that in order to educate our populace, we have to enslave them as well, right, in this debt cycle. I think that was an intentional policy, and I think that if we were committed to an educated populace in America, we could come up with a model to do that without, putting our future generation into enormous debt.
Okay. I mean, one story I can tell is that in Florida, and I which is a very red state, Republican-led state, not that dissimilar from Ohio. In Florida, if you get above a 3.5 grade point average from high school, then you get to go to college basically for free. I'd love to have that in Ohio. And if I can use the State Board of Education as a platform for that, I would.
But I mean, think about that, right? Like, at what point did we how did we frame the conversation in such a way, instead of having conversations about how the new generation, how the American people can just be, by and large, the best educated in the world because we are that competitive, we're having conversations about the values of, structured higher education because of debt. Like, it seems misguided to me,
How so?
Because fate is not what you're given, is what you take. Like, we're the American people, right? We have the ability to structure our future in a way that does not put debt. Who said that we have to burden our people in debt? Like, where does that come from?
Yeah, it's not like this in Europe, for sure.
I don't think that that's what capitalism is for either. And I am a capitalist, right? I don't think that that's what capitalism is for. No.
Well, some would argue to be ways to manage populations. For example, and you go through a college. I mean, let's dig into the American dream. You go to college, you get a good job, you make a good living out of it, you buy a house, you pay over the next 30 years, by then you're retired.
You are describing America in 1950 is what I'm saying.
Okay.
It existed. But then, for some reason, and that's the thing that I'm still trying to figure out, for some reason, when you were back in that time, you could be a meat packer and you would get that American dream that you're talking about. But then we shipped manufacturing overseas, right? So that, all the wages went down, right? And I guess part of it was, the unions were getting more powerful. Again, I think it's something that we need to ask ourselves, because we had that model. We had the American dream, right? And I don't think that it was because we lost money or whatever. I think that there was an intentionality in rolling that back, and I think that to bring that back, maybe there needs to be an intentionality from us, right, to revisit some of the policies that we made. Milton Friedman and his economic policies, I think, are worth revisiting as well. But I don't know much, man. I'm just a guy trying to figure things out.
So in the part of the phenomenon that you're describing, I've heard it. A word associated with it is called the Great Compression, in which because that era in the 1950s was when a lot of the income inequality got a lot better, right? And so after World War II, America had this incredible industrial capability. And so after the war, that capability was used to make stuff, and people could go and work in the factory for most of their lives, like my grandfather did, work in the steel mills near Cleveland. And, they weren't going to move. Like, there was a steel mill there. You can't just, all of a sudden shut it down and start up somewhere else. And so it was a time of great stability, and the labor unions are very strong. That was a big part of the success. And what you're seeing now is actually a resurgence of the labor unions in a lot of ways. You see more auto workers joining unions. You see Amazon warehouse workers starting unions. You see Starbucks trying to unionize. And so you're seeing a resurgence of the unions in the United States because people are realizing that that's one of the best ways to address these affordable housing crises and address the cost of living and all those things.
I mean, it's interesting. We can continue this conversation with quite a bit some time, I think, but we have to kind of sort of
Sure.
time. We have to put it in a posture. We'll do the conclusion. So, Chris, if or when you get in office, how will you serve the immigrant community in District 6 once you get into State Board of Education?
Yeah, so there are many different options for schools that families have, and a lot of families will choose the first option, which is the public schools, right? So they don't have to go to public schools. There's other kinds of schools. There's charter schools. There's private schools, right? But for a family that doesn't know the system as well as some of the family, they're probably going to send their kids to the public schools, and so we need to make sure that first option is the best option that it can be. And if there's budget cuts in spring of 2025 with the budget negotiations, that's not going to help if we're firing teachers. If we're not giving teachers the best resources that we can give them, that's not going to help. And that's really what I'm here to do. It's what I've been doing for the last decade, is trying to make sure that the teachers have the training and the respect and the freedoms and all the tools that they need.
This the upcoming debate.
November 1st.
November 1st. What do you hope the audience to take away that, or to look forward to it in terms of the long-term vision?
It's fairly clear in my mind. I believe that I think that Columbus, Ohio can be that venue that attracts all kinds of incredible Afro-eclectic intellectuals from all over the world and shapes policy through our debates, through our conversations, that forces governments to respond, right? That forces policymakers to consider alternatives. And the goal long-term is to grow from just a debate series into an Africa Investment Week, where for a whole week, we bring the best entrepreneurs, we bring the best minds together, we bring government officials together, and we make Columbus, Ohio this hub for brainstorming, for investing in newer ideas that could shape, our continent and contribute, frankly, to Columbus, to the U.S. For decades. I really think that's possible. It's very clear to me. The world is shifting, my brother. There's so much going on, and we have a responsibility, especially those of us in the diaspora, to be a part of those conversations, right? So that's what we're trying to do.